I'm going to show you the capnometry and heart rate variability application, which is obviously about putting two parameters together in one application so that you can see them both together, which is sometimes interesting and useful to do, but it's like an auxiliary application in the context of the course rather than a frontline application, meaning that you don't have to use it if you think that it's not going to be that relevant to you, or you want to avoid overcomplicating things. It's just up to you. Okay, so let's go into it. Let's launch the platform program. First thing to talk about is device setup. So on the setup tab, device setup, you want to select the heart rate source. Now in this case I'm going to select Contec because that's for a pulse oximeter, because I want to show you something to do with the device setup. And then you also need to set up properly the capnometer source. So I'm going to go for Respironics compatible there, which is the rental device that I have. Okay, so I can click OK there. Now the thing that I want to show you about using those two devices together is that you've got to be careful because they both use virtual COM ports, and you need to make sure that you're not getting them mixed up for the application to work properly. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go to the device manager, the Windows device manager, which I need to right click on the start button to get the control panel up, and then I'm going to search for it. There it is, device manager. So I'll start that. Now if you've used the other applications or watched the other videos, then you'll have seen this before, but when you connect the devices, they show up on the device manager. So I'm going to start by connecting the capnometer. Okay, I've plugged it in and it appears in the ports section. So there it is, that's my capnometer, it's COM3. Again, you've seen that before, but the thing that you need to note here is the number of the COM port. So it's COM3, the capnometer is COM3. Now that's relevant because when I connect my pulse oximeter, which is also connects to USB and creates a virtual COM port, I'm going to do that now. Okay, so it's connected now. It took a little bit longer. Now you see something that might be at first sight slightly confusing. You've got this what looks like the same device twice. Yeah, actually uses the same driver for Windows, but the second one, which is now COM4, is my pulse oximeter. So I just need to make a note of that for when I start the applications. So let's go to the Capnometry tab of the platform program, and we'll start the HRV, the Capnometry and HRV application. Okay, now notice top right, I've got a couple of buttons here that are relevant. So that the one labeled capnometer is the properties for the capnometer device. So the port selection, now it's just done this sort of pretty much at random, but it's actually got it round the wrong way because I know that my capnometer is on COM3. So I need to select that to COM3 for it to work properly. Leave everything else the same. Okay. And then the pulse oximeter, I can get the properties for that using the HR button there. So I know that that is now COM4. So I've switched that over. Click OK again. So now I should be good to go. I'm not going to do it yet because I'm going to demonstrate the software just using the simulator, but that should work fine now. Sometimes there's a little bit of leftover confusion in the BioEra application, and you might need to press play and stop once or twice, or even close down the application and restart it before it gets thoroughly unconfused and it'll work, but eventually it will work. Okay, so I'm not going to use that. I'm going to go back to the device setup and go to simulator for the purposes of demonstrating. Okay, so yes, platform program, Capnometry tab, 3 applications, 3 columns. The right hand one is for the Capnometry and HRV application. So we've got the usual buttons, one to start the application, one for a session report, and one for an application report. Now I'm not going to say anything more about the reports because they work just as you would expect and just like the other report functions for other applications. So if you've used the other report functions, you'll have no problem there. They'll be just the same. Different data, of course, but they work in the same way. Okay, so let's start the application in simulator mode. Takes a second to come up. So here we are. I'll press play again to start the data. Again, I'm in the simulator mode, so it's just playing back a recording now. So just a quick overview. The application follows the same pattern as other applications. So we've got short-term display in the top, and then a long-term display, numeric displays, and audio feedback controls, and 2 thresholds which are connected with audio feedback. So threshold 1 on the left, threshold 2 on the right. Now you might also notice that we've got a support window which is showing the sort of the raw heart rate data, if you like. So the signal from the in this case the pulse oximeter, and I can check that it's reading right, and I'm checking that it's detecting heartbeats. There's no problem there. You rarely need to look at that actually, so I'll say no more about that. Okay, so let's go through everything in a bit more detail. So the short-term display, we've got the 2 parameters, which are the capnometry trace, which is in sort of yellow-green, and a sequence of peaks. The height of the peak being the most important measure, that's the end tidal CO2. And then we've got a red trace, which is heart rate. So you can see here, at the moment the vertical scale is 0 to 50, which pertains to the carbon dioxide trace. I can switch to heart rate in that scale by clicking on the colored button. So now I've got kind of the range for the heart rate. So I'll go back to the carbon dioxide. You've got the usual dotted yellow line below which we've got a degree of overbreathing. You can see here that for the recording we've started off with a degree of overbreathing, and now it looks as though it's getting slightly better, and it's also slowing down. So those are the 2 primary parameters, heart rate and the capnometry signal. We've got some controls to adjust the display if you need to. Firstly, a simple one, we've got the period or the time scale, the horizontal scale. You can set that if you want. I rarely see a need to do that. But what else? You can set the heart rate range using that control, and it's in beats per minute, of course. You can adjust the heart rate range up and down within the display. You can center it. If it drifts off the top or off the bottom, it should automatically happen after a minute, but if you want to recenter it, as it were, then you can click this button here. See how it just adjusted it slightly to recenter it. Okay, so those are the controls for the short-term display. We've got the 2 bar graphs which show the independent scales again, and what else is there? The scale for the carbon dioxide measure is fixed. There's no option to adjust that. So let's move on to the long-term display. So these are that now sort of calculated parameters. We've got the end tidal CO2, which is the peak of the graph here. So there and there and there, etc. So you know about that, and you can see in this session with the simulator, we'd started off at a poor state of breathing, and it's getting better and better, and the end tidal or the peak measure of CO2 is going up and up, which is good, which is what training is all about. At the same time, we've got the blue signal is breathing rate, and that's coming down. Started off quite fast. It's now stabilizing at about 6 breaths per minute, which I can show you. If I click on the blue button there, I now get the breaths per minute scale on the vertical scale, vertical axis there, and I can now see it's around about 6. I've stabilized the breathing at around about 6. And at the same time, as that happens, you can see that the yellow trace, which is for the coherence score, so again I've clicked on the yellow button to get the vertical scale, 0 to 100 for coherence score. You can see that as the breath has slowed down and stabilized, the coherence has come up. So that just shows you the connection between slow regular breathing and heart rate coherence. But you get the basic idea of that. That's the long-term display. You can adjust the ranges, of course, using this set of controls. So firstly, you can change the time scale or the period, the horizontal scale, using this control, combo box. I'll leave it at 10. You can change the scale for the heart rate coherence score. It's 0 to 100 now. I could say knock that down to say 75. Now it's jumped up. The yellow trace has just changed, but the blue and the green have stayed the same, and I've got 0 to 75 here. I can also change the breathing rate from currently 0 to 20. I could pick anything else for that. And finally, I can change the peak CO2 scale. So 20 to 50. This is for the green trace here. 20 to 50 works fine for now, so I'll leave that, but you could change it if you wanted. Okay, so that's the long-term display and the controls. Let's talk a little bit about the audio feedback. So there are two forms. So just like the other applications in the Capnometry section of the Mind Body Training Tools software, we've got MIDI and threshold-based feedback. So, and they work just as you would expect. If you've used the other applications, you know what MIDI feedback is, you know what threshold-based feedback is. They work just as you would expect. You've got separate play buttons and volume controls, and same for the threshold. You can select which parameter to feedback for the MIDI feedback using that button there. So again, the basic idea of MIDI feedback just means that you get a musical note whose pitch reflects the chosen parameter. Threshold feedback can be useful in mindfulness practice, just to sort of warn you when you're drifting out of your desired range. Yeah, so for example, I could have it to warn me when the breathing rate has gone up above a certain limit, as it has here. Yeah, or it could warn me that my heart rate coherence score has gone down below a certain limit. Now I just want to point something out here, which is that in this part of the recording in the simulator, look what's happened. The green end tidal CO2 trace has gone up, and then it's stabilized at the same time as the breathing rate went down. But now, more recently, the breathing rate is sped up, but my green end tidal CO2 trace has still remained pretty high. So just proving the point, at least in this section, that it's possible to breathe fast and still have a pretty good CO2 or carbon dioxide oxygen balance in the breathing. So there's not just one optimal rate of breathing. That's just emphasizing that point. Now, of course, the end tidal is just going down a little bit. So I think that's more or less all there is to say. Everything should work as you expect if you've used the other applications. We've got threshold-based feedback there. I think I've said everything I need to there. Yeah, enjoy the application.